Okay, so hello and welcome back to another Unity multiplayer tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be taking our project and integrating dedicated server hosting with UGS, Unity Gaming Services, and we'll also be setting up Matchmaker so that we can have players queue up, be matched against each other, and when their match is made, it will spin up a dedicated server just for those players, and they'll all be connected. I hope you're looking forward to it, so let's get started. This video is sponsored by Unity. Check out the links in the description to read up more about Matchmaker and other Unity gaming services. So as always, there'll be a link down below in the description to the GitHub repository for this project, and if you want to follow along, I'd highly recommend downloading this with this commit that I'm using, which is the commit Matchmaker tutorial complete. That way you'll be able to follow along with no issues, and this time in particular there won't actually be any coding in this video, because all that I've really changed in the project is I've just put in a bunch of boilerplate code that exists in this other repository, the MatchPlay samples project by Unity. And this basically shows you how to get hooked up with dedicated server hosting and matchmaking. And the focus of this tutorial is actually the UGS dashboard itself and how to set up everything on here to get it hooked up. So if you just take this project and open it up, you'll have basically what I've been working with, and you can even still run it like I'm going to do now. I've got two versions here, and if you run, you can still host privately, like you don't actually need to use dedicated server hosting. If you hit host, this is hosting locally, but using relay, so someone could connect over the internet. Lobbies, join the lobby. So it's still working like it has been over the previous tutorials. If you've been following along with those, you can then pick your character, lock in, and then it spawns them in the scene like so, just to show that it can persist. But today we're going to be also adding dedicated server hosting. So once you've got the project installed, you'll want to head up to Edit and Project Settings, and then over to the Services tab. Now, if you've already been following along or you have your own project, you'll probably have this already linked. You see here, I've got it linked to my organization and project. And if you don't, then there'll just be a button to link it. So you need to make sure you're linked up to UGS. And once you're done, you'll be able to go to the UGS website here on the Unity dashboard, go to multiplayer, and you should see your project here. So multiplayer character select. So that's how you hook up to UGS, and you're also going to need to close this and make sure that you've got on your Unity hub for the version of Unity you're using. If you go to add modules on the right here, make sure that you've got Linux dedicated server build support. That way you can do a dedicated server build and then deploy it to UGS. So once that's installed, you can then go back to Unity, go to File, Build Settings, and you'll want to switch the platform to dedicated server and switch the target platform to Linux, like so. And then once you've done this, it will need to recompile, so just give that a minute. Okay, so now you've got target platform set to Linux and dedicated server selected as the platform. And now, if you don't see the build button at the bottom, it might say switch platform, hit that first, and then it'll change to a build button. And once it has done, you can hit build, select the directory for your build. So I've got a client build folder and a server build folder. So inside of server build, I'm going to hit save and hit yes to replace my already existing build. So now that the server build is complete, you can head over to the UGS dashboard and we'll want to go up to game server hosting, set up multiplay, and then this process will actually take a while as it enables it for your project. So just sit tight and wait for it to finish enabling. Okay, so now the setup is done. We can go to step 1, which is integrate game server. And as you can see here, it supports Unity, Unreal, and soon it will be supporting custom engines. But we want Unity, so we'll hit next. And we've already selected our organization and hooked that up, so we can hit next again. And as it says here, add the packages necessary, but I've already done that. And if you've downloaded my project, you'll already have them anyway. But if you don't, you can go here and add the multiplay package. Once you're done, hit finish, and we can go to step 2. And step 2 is uploading the build, which we've already made. So we'll create a build, and we can call the build name server build or test build or whatever you want. Now, at the moment, it only supports Linux, but there'll be Windows support coming soon. And like I say, this is just for the actual dedicated server, so you don't have to worry about your operating system. But we made a Linux dedicated server build, so this will be good. And we're just going to directly upload our files. So we'll go to next, give it a second, and it'll ask us to upload our files here. So what you can do is you can open that folder we had, and you want to take the free files here, or the 2 files in the folder. Don't bother with the burst debug information. We just need the free others, and we'll drop those in, and then hit upload files. Okay, mine is done, but with one file failed, and if this ever happens, just hit retry, and usually it works right away. There we go. And then you can hit next. It says here, server build version 1, finish. The next step is to create a build configuration, so we'll create this. And for the configuration name, we can just call it server config. For the build, select your server build. And then for the game server executable, just type in 86, and you'll find here server build.86_64, that's the executable. Then for the query type, just go with SQP, it's the default, and that's what we're actually integrating with the dedicated server hosting. And then for the launch parameters, this is basically how our game code can read the port and the IP, and also know where to output server logs to. So for the code that I've used, since it's just like this match play example from Unity themselves that I've linked below, if you scroll down in their documentation, there is a string here, and I'll also put it in this video's description, like it says here, and if we copy this string, paste it in over this, it's slightly different, but it basically does the same thing, except as you see here, we can read the IP and then the port and everything, and then we use that in our code in our project. And then when there's logs, it will output it to this directory /matchplaylog.log as a text file. And once you've set this up, we can go next. We can ignore this step, go next, and it tells you here the hardware, and you can customize this if you need, but for us, we'll just leave it as default and hit finish. So it says here that the build must be synced before the build configuration is created, so I think I've jumped into this step a little too quickly, so I'm just going to back out of this, and I'm going to just go through it again really quickly on my own and see if it works this time. Okay, it was successful this time. We can now go and create a fleet. So we'll just call this server fleet. And a fleet is basically a group of servers, like it says here, a collection of servers that host the game or application in specific regions. So you can have different settings for different regions. Maybe certain regions need more servers than others. So select here, Linux, select our build config, and hit next. The region I'm making this for is for Europe, since I'm in Europe. And then for min and max servers, this is basically how many servers it can scale up to, and the minimum servers that it will always keep online. And if you've actually got a game in production, I'd recommend having this be greater than 0, so that when people queue up, a match can be found immediately. But if your game is just for you to test every now and then, you don't want a server always running, because that can start to build up the cost. So on here, we'll just set the min servers to 0 and the max to something like 5. It really doesn't matter. I just, like I say, would keep this at 0 if you're just testing on your own. Then we'll hit finish. And now that you're done, you want to make sure it's working, of course, so we'll create a test allocation. And if you go in here, you can select your fleet, your region, and your build config, and it will try spinning up a server for you, and it will let you know if everything goes okay. And sometimes it will just take 2 or 3 attempts to work if your build has been freshly uploaded. But let's hope this time that it works right away. So we'll hit run test. It's going to send an allocation, which is basically asking the UGS servers, hey, we'd like a server. I'd like you to allocate one to us. And now it's waiting for the server to spin up. As it says here with the warning, it might take some time if a new server is being created, and this is all fresh, so it is taking longer than usual. And sometimes I found that if I just cancel, go to test allocations, you'll see here it's pending. Let's just cancel the one that we had and make a new one. And sometimes in the past when I've done this, it then just works immediately. So we'll try again. And there we go. We can see the test allocation was successful, and it's going to just stay up for an hour and then shut down. Or you can deallocate it manually, since we know we are done here. We don't need to read any logs or test anything. So that means our dedicated servers are set up correctly. And now it's time to set up Matchmaker. So we'll head over to the Matchmaker tab, hit Setup Matchmaker, and this is a lot faster. So as it says here, currently you must use game server hosting as your hosting provider to use Matchmaker, which is why we've just set this up. So integrate Matchmaker. As you can see here, it supports Unity, Unreal, and also custom engines via an API, but we're using the Unity SDK for now. So let's hit next. We've already set up the project, so we can hit next. And if you don't already have the package, which you should if you've taken my project, then we've got the Matchmaker package here. Then we hit finish. And then step 2, for Matchmaker, you need to create a queue. So we can call this whatever you want, maybe solo queue, team queue, casual, competitive queue, whatever you want. So if you are following along with my project, I've set up casual queue and competitive queue, and I'll show you later how to change it in the code. But for now, we'll do casual-queue, and make sure this is all lowercase, just like how I've written it. And the max players on a ticket is how many players can queue up together. And we don't have a way currently for people to queue up as a group, as a party, so we'll just set this to be 1 for now and hit create. And then we need to create a pool, and this is how you set up the actual rules for your matchmaking. So the pool name we can just call test pool. The queue is the casual queue, and leave it on default, and the timeout is basically how long someone can sit in queue before it just rejects them. So in a lot of games it might be like an hour or a very long period of time, it seems, but for our game we'll just leave it as a minute so we have nothing sitting in there for too long. So if someone's taking longer than a minute to queue, then we can time them out. And you could set this to be whatever you like, then hit next. We're using game server hosting, and the fleet we want to use is our server fleet with the server build configuration, so it knows which servers to spin up when a match is found. Then we can go next, and this is where you set up the rules. So you can either use this built-in logic builder, or if you know what you're doing, you can go in and maybe just take the JSON and write it that way. And if we go in here, we want to give a definition or a name for our definition. So I'll just call this like test rules or something. And then the region is Europe. Backfill enabled. This is, for example, if you're making a game where people can leave and join as the game is active, then you need to enable backfill, and there'd be a bit more in the code that you'd need to add. But in our case for this game, it's just a game where people queue up and then the match starts. So it makes sense to have backfill off. We want the max players to be there, all 4 of them, before the game can start. Then if we go down to teams, this game isn't necessarily a team game, even though the players are against each other. This here is mainly useful if you actually had actual teams where you want to get people balanced. So for example, each team should be balanced in skill or balanced in number of players or whatever it may be. But for us, I'll just call this my team. It doesn't actually matter in our case. And the team count, so you can basically have it so that each player is their own team. And that's the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to say the team count minimum is 4 and the max is 4, and that way it requires 4 players to be in our game before a match can actually be made. And you can also add relaxations here, so you can say as an example, after a certain amount of time the max teams may be free or the min teams may also be free, and that way you can make it so as people are in queue for ages and they're getting bored from being in queue, you can say, okay, let's allow the game to start with fewer players. So you could say here, replace the minimum for the teams with free after a certain amount of time, and then you could have another relaxation which says replace it with 2 after even longer. So you could say after a minute people can match with 3 players, and then after you could say 2 minutes here with 120 seconds 2 players can be matched against each other if you wanted to do it this way. And then once you've made those rules, you can then minimize them with this folding here. And then for the player count, this is how many people can be on each team. And since we've got 4 teams of 1, the player count min and max is just going to be 1 for each team. And then if your game actually had teams with skill and balancing, you could add team rules. So you could say here, you can do comparisons. So when you actually start a matchmaking ticket, you can pass through the player's skill or other variables like that. And you could say here, make sure that the skill of the teams are roughly balanced, or make sure the skill of the teams are greater than or less than a certain value. As you can see here, you can actually check any of this. And it doesn't have to be skill, it can be anything. So you can pass through any data you want and you can check it here with these comparisons to make sure the teams are how you want them. But in my case, I don't actually have any logic for the teams, so I'm going to remove this rule. And so now we've set up the rules for our game, we can back out of this. So if we go to the bottom, hit create, the pool will be created. And the next step is just to make more pools if you want, but in our case, we're fine with this. And now everything should be ready to go. So now I want to test against myself, but because I'm using anonymous authentication, if I run 2 builds, as far as UGS is concerned, they're both the same player. But if I run the editor in a build, they're different. So I'm going to actually go in and change my queue just for this testing to actually be a maximum players, or a minimum players, sorry, of 2. That way I can actually start a game against myself. So I'll go into the pool, go to the rules. This is how you'd find it if you wanted to go back. And then we can go here. We need to actually edit it, so hit edit. I can say the min is 2 and the max is 4. And then over here, these rules don't really make sense now since 2 wouldn't go up to 3 and then back to 2. So I'm actually just going to remove these, but now that you know how to add them if you want to, that's how you do it. And then we need to make sure we save this again. Actually, yeah, save at the top, save changes. Okay, so I'm going to do one more test allocation to make sure everything is ready for testing. Select all the settings, go, run test. Done almost immediately, great. So I'm going to deallocate that, go to Unity, and I'm going to hit find match. And we start searching, and the queue starts a timer. I'll go to the second build, hit find match. This also starts a timer. And after a few seconds, hopefully it should match these two players together. Now, because we just changed the rules, it may not happen immediately. So if it doesn't, we can just wait. And there we go. It's now saying connecting. I can now go in, pick my character, lock in, pick character, lock in, like so. And everything works like it used to. So now we can use the same project to do relay, lobby, matchmaking, and dedicated server hosting all in one. So if we close this now, we can now have a little look through the code. So if we go to the main menu object, we can then go to main menu display, and you can see here how we actually trigger the matchmaking to start. So I have the button on the UI, and that calls find match pressed. And I've got some Boolean logic here to make sure that you can press the same button to start and stop the queue, and that if you're already canceling the queue, it won't try canceling it again. And then in here, we have these methods like game manager cancel matchmaking and game manager matchmake async. So if I go into this method, you'll see here, it basically checks, are we already matchmaking? And if we are, then just don't do anything. But if we're not, we will call get match async. And in here, eventually we call matchmaker.matchmake. And this matchmaker component, if we go in there, has all the logic here for querying or using the SDK to actually create our ticket and then add ourselves to that ticket and then try creating the ticket on the matchmaker service. And then here it basically says, while it isn't cancelled, keep trying it. We have to keep pinging the server to check if the match has been found. And then it checks here if a match is found, then returns success. And if it fails and times out, then do this. So you can have a look through all this code and see how it works. But like I said, the reason we're not coding this in the video is that it would take a very long time because this is only a tiny part of the code. And most of it is just boilerplate. Between my project, your project, and someone else's, this code will basically not change. So there's no point in really teaching it because most of it is just boilerplate that you need to get hooked up. However, there are a few things that you can change from project to project. So I'll show you that now. If I go to the code over here, go to the shared code, we have game data over here. So in this script, we have some enums that you will want to change based on your game. So like how I said, I've got it set up for casual and competitive. You can change this enum, add to it, whatever you want. And if I select casual, you'll see down here at the bottom, we have a dictionary and some const strings for going between the enum and the name that we actually use on UGS. So when I said type casual-q, it has to match this, otherwise our code wouldn't work. Because in our code, we basically say, take this and go query against this. So if this was spelt wrong, it wouldn't actually know what to do on the matchmaking side. And then if we go over to the server game manager, you'll see over here in the set allocation data method, I've hard-coded 4, which really I should have made a variable and set it up somewhere else. But yeah, you might need to adjust this for the max players for your game. So just keep that in mind. If you're copying my code and then adjusting it, make sure you change this. And like I said, probably change it somewhere else rather than hard-coding it in here. And the way I've separated the dedicated server hosting from the actual client hosting where someone hosts the match themselves is that I've made these 3 folders. We've got client, host, and server. And so I've put code in each of these for logic that's specific to them. So in server, we have the server game manager. This is how they set it up in their sampler project. So it has specific dedicated server logic in here. And then if we go to host and look in the host singleton over here, this is where we have the logic for creating the relay allocation. And if we go down here, we'll create the lobby over here. So this is how I've separated the logic. Okay, that's it for this tutorial. We now have the project hooked up to UGS for dedicated server hosting, matchmaking, as well as previously lobby and relay. So if you have any questions, be sure to ask them down below. There'll be plenty of resource links in the description as well. There'll be a link to the repository so you can follow along. a link to the match play sample, so you can go and look through that. And there'll also be the links to the documentation for everything we've used here. Thanks again to Unity for sponsoring this video, and if you enjoyed and found it useful, then please leave a like and subscribe, it would help a lot. That's it for now, so I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. But of course, before I go, I've got to thank my patrons. Special thanks to Francisco Lira, Ryan Shu, David McDermott, Gregory Pierce, Kyle K, Mark McCorkle, Roman Arriaga, and Sahila. If anyone else would like to help support the channel monetarily, link to Patreon is down below. If not, there are also links down below to other social media such as Twitch, Twitter, and Discord. If you could help us out by following on any of those or checking any of those out, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.